Confess to me all that you have done, child, that I might record it in an adventure log. These are the words recited to the player whenever they save their game in Square Enix's Dragon Quest series, the progenitor of the Japanese role-playing game. And in the world of Dragon Quest, saving the game means visiting a church to speak to the priest. How may our church assist you, faithful disciple? The cleric asks. And from a menu of options, the player chooses confession, and shares all that they and their companions have done, so the priest may record those experiences in a journal. Where other games have simplified or obscured the act of saving, for Dragon Quest, a series deeply steeped in tradition, this save ritual has always stuck, just one of many customs that makes these games such a warm, comforting experience to their fans. Compared to modern Western games of similar sizes and scales, Dragon Quest methods of saving may seem quaint, perhaps even troublingly restrictive. Yet to those who continue to play and love Dragon Quest, confessing to save one's game is an ineffable part of the series' singular charm. Dragon Quest speaks to the potential for the omnipresent function of game saves to serve as more than just a necessary technical function of the gameplay experience. Like any other mechanic which serves to immerse us in the world of the game, saving one's progress can be integrated into the diegesis. Doing so can, in tandem with other gameplay mechanics, help to forge a strong link between player and game. One stronger than if, all else being equal, the diegetic save mechanic were absent. I demonstrate this assertion first by explaining how save mechanics have evolved into three distinct categories. And I argue that in the case of what I call the diegetic operator save, the act of saving one's game operates upon the player as a psychological tether, providing a link to our existing progress in which we take comfort and confidence when moving through the game, and as a suturing mechanism that encourages identification between player and game. In this way, the diegetic operator save emerges as uniquely effective in enhancing one's immersion in and identification with the world of the game. So, let's take a look at these categories. The framework I'm building on here is Alexander Galloway's 4 moments of gamic action, which are built upon two intersecting axes: machine versus operator actions and diegetic versus non-diegetic actions. First are diegetic machine acts, or actions by the game made separate from the player that still exist within the world of the game. Think here of the behavior of NPCs, or environmental aspects like weather and terrain, which shape and affect the world, but that the player has no control over. Second are non-diegetic operator acts, what Galloway calls actions of configuration. Pressing pause or adjusting the settings in a menu would apply here. Third are diegetic operator acts, player-controlled movements that take place within the world of gameplay, such as Mario jumping or the Master Chief firing a battle rifle. Fourth are the non-diegetic machine acts, which are actions the game takes without operator input that are also detached from the world of the game, like keeping scores or adjusting difficulty. I find these distinctions very useful, to the point that I'm a little surprised Galloway does not extend his analysis to game saves, which are wholly applicable in this schema. Saves are a gamic action available to the machine or the operator, situated within and without the diegesis, and which feel meaningfully different to the player depending where along these axes the game's save mechanics are situated. Thus, I have identified 3 overall categories of game save mechanics, based on Galloway's formulation, but specific to the act of saving. These are the non-diegetic operator saves, diegetic operator saves, and non-diegetic machine saves. First, the non-diegetic operator save, which I define as manual save mechanics divorced from the world of the game. These are cases in which the player chooses to save, usually through a non-diegetic menu consisting of 1 or more save slots, either at intervals set by the game or at intervals of their own choosing. The act of saving is not an action that in any way exists within the diegesis, and is analogous to actions of configuration, like adjusting settings in a menu. Examples of games with this kind of save mechanic include Myst, Baldur's Gate, Skyrim, The Witcher 3, and all or most entries in the Legend of Zelda, Fire Emblem, Pokemon, and Final Fantasy series. The game may allow players to save at any time, as in Skyrim, or it may restrict players to save in certain areas, like Final Fantasy VII, or after certain milestones, like in Super Mario 64, which allows players to save after stages are completed. In all cases, saving is determined by player choice, the choice not to save being just as relevant as the choice to save, and is not narrativized as part of the game's internal diegesis. Save states in video game emulators and scores and leaderboards in arcade games or arcade-style games would also belong to this category. Second is the diegetic operator save. Manual saves situated within the world of the game. The Dragon Quest example is our prototypical illustration here. It's an option left to the player that they can choose whether or not to interact with, but which exist within the world of the game. Many mediums for this diegetic interaction are possible, from confessing to a priest in Dragon Quest, speaking to your house's personal gyroid in the original Animal Crossing, or visiting Candy Kong's save tent in Donkey Kong Country. These save mechanics may include a non-diegetic component, such as a menu with save slots accessed after engaging with the diegetic save medium, which could include additional extra diegetic information like a play clock, but they are primarily framed as diegetic interactions within the narrative flow of the game. Like many aspects of game design, they are not purely categorizable as one kind of operation, and we could argue that there is no such thing as a purely diegetic save mechanic, since, as Jesper Juhl would argue, all saves rupture the continuity of time within a game's diegesis. Some games do take efforts to mitigate this, though. Dragon Quest, Stardew Valley, and Animal Crossing all allow for narrativized breaks taken by the player/avatar character, thus making the break taken by the operator to at least partially fit within the diegesis. Either way, the diegetic components of mechanics in this second category are phenomenologically significant, and as I will soon demonstrate, the distinction is still very valuable. Third and finally is the non-diegetic machine save, more commonly known in gaming parlance as autosaves, or cases where the game creates a save record or checkpoint without operator input. These are employed by a wide variety of games, as both a primary and secondary save mechanic. They are most visible in genres like fighting, racing, and sports games, along with MOBAs and competitive multiplayer shooters, all of which are games built not on linear narrative progress, but on earning experience, ranks, abilities, costumes, equipment, and so on. The first two categories of save mechanics would make little sense here, and automatic machine saves are therefore the standard, working as a constant background operation invisible to the player. But these are hardly the only cases in which non-diegetic machine saves are employed. First and third-person shooter campaigns, in addition to their adjacent multiplayer modes, almost exclusively use autosave mechanics. In series like Halo, Call of Duty, and Gears of War, players move through largely linear levels in sequential order, and the game saves progress at predetermined checkpoints. And various open-world or exploration-based games have employed autosaves as their primary save mechanic too, such as the Batman Arkham quadrilogy, Red Dead Redemption, Diablo 3, Grand Theft Auto 5, and most entries in the Assassin's Creed series up until 2017. It is important to note that these three categories do not exist in isolation, and while I am unaware of a game that involves all three, since non-diegetic and diegetic operator saves would be mutually exclusive, it is extremely common for games to employ an operator save and a machine save in tandem. Starting with Grand Theft Auto 4, for instance, Rockstar's games have employed autosaves as the primary save mechanic, with non-diegetic operator saves available to players in a menu if they so choose. Most commonly, though, the opposite is true, with some form of an operator save serving as the primary mechanic and an autosave or checkpoint system serving as a secondary backup. This is how the most recent Dragon Quest title, Dragon Quest XI, handles saving. It primarily employs diegetic operator saves through the confession mechanic, but also features an autosave that quietly kicks in when one enters a dungeon or a town to ensure that a game over does not result in too much progress lost. This kind of mixture is common in the contemporary gaming landscape, with games like Animal Crossing New Horizons, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and Fire Emblem Three Houses, each foregrounding operator saves while being backed up by an additional autosave system. Now that we have these categories established, what do we do with them? Well, we're going to take a little dive into psychoanalysis and semiotics here, so just bear with me, I promise there's a point to all this. In his book, The Damaged Core, Salman Akhtar explains what he calls the fantasy of a tether, which is one of three fantasies related to unresolved separation individuation in the period of childhood development where infants simultaneously develop a sense of self and form boundaries to see others as individuals. The third substage of this development, rapprochement, is where unresolved separation individuation stems from. It's the stage where a child both desires independence and fears abandonment, wanting to explore and go further afield while maintaining proximity to the mother or guardian. A successful maturation through this stage results in the child developing a mental image of their mother in which they can take a sense of safety and confidence when they're physically distant. Through multiple case studies, Akhtar identifies patients whose anxieties stemmed from a failure to fully develop along this path, finding themselves stuck in rapprochement, where they desire both the freedom to explore and a tangible proximity to a source of safety. So a person might go jogging, but only within a very strict distance from their house, or they might imbue another person, place, object as a totem that they know they can return to. These become imagined tethers that minimize separation anxiety. And there's a lot of applicability here to the act of saving in a video game. Saves serve as totems, privileged objects from which we draw the safety and comfort needed to continue playing. And virtually all save mechanics operate as tethers, with varying degrees of strength. This is easy to illustrate in an example like Dragon Quest, where the game gives its players confidence to move through a massive world by marking the landscape with churches that serve as tether points. Imagine the counterfactual, where Dragon Quest provided no save points at all, and merely expected players to explore everywhere and complete all objectives over dozens of hours without the ability to save or a comforting place to do so. And the effect becomes clear. It's kind of like rock climbing. There are a few crazy people who would do it without a harness, but most people are gonna want that tether. Operator saves tend to be the strongest tethers, because they are the ones we can most easily see and access. This applies to both diegetic and non-diegetic operator saves. While the former situates the act of saving within the game's world, the latter still allows players direct, controlled access to their saves, and thus a way to regularly check that their tether is intact. Non-diegetic machine saves, autosaves, can therefore be trickier, because while the tether is still there, we know the game is working behind the scenes to record our progress, it's been obfuscated from us in a way that makes the privileged object of the save much less tangible. And while all save systems are subject to corruption or failure, when it happens to a save we have no control over, it feels a lot more catastrophic. The peace of mind that comes from having control over records of our progress, like the ability to save in multiple slots, or to make copies and backups, that helps strengthen our resolve over fears of systemic meltdown. The relationship between the player and their tether, their save file, can also be leveraged by the developer as a central mechanic, and there's actually a long lineage of games doing just that. This is most obvious in the Metroidvania genre, a grouping of games named for the influence of the original Metroid and Super Metroid, and the subsequent innovations of 1997's Castlevania Symphony of the Night. In games like these, which also include Dark Souls, Axiom Verge, SteamWorld Dig, Hollow Knight, and a small army of other indie titles, the player is given a large, labyrinthine, interconnected space to explore, with progress made by finding equipment and power-ups, fighting enemies, solving puzzles, unlocking shortcuts, and slowly but surely getting a sense of the layout of the world. Under the influence of Super Metroid, most of these games employ diegetic save rooms, or areas free of enemies or hazards, where players save their progress while exploring. Finding this room is often a key goal while surveying a new area, and there's an explicit risk-reward trade-off in venturing far enough to find a save room and make one's new equipment, power-ups, and map data permanent versus going too far, perishing, and losing all of that essential progress. Which is exactly how Akhtar explains the tether fantasy, as a neuroses about distance, literal or figurative, from the anchoring person or environment. The main manifest issue, he writes, is of distance versus safety. And that's a great way to describe the central animating force of this gameplay loop. Dark Souls and its sequels, including the recent sensation Elden Ring, make this particularly devilish by tying experience and leveling to souls collected from vanquished enemies, which can only be used by reaching a bonfire and spending those souls on improving various attributes. If the player keeps going further without spending souls, they can amass a greater and greater pool of souls on which to make bigger enhancements, but they also risk being killed by an enemy, at which point they have one chance to return to the place where they died and collect the lost souls. Otherwise, they're gone forever. The bonfire thus serves as the totem to which the player is tethered, and their distance from it determines the choices they're going to make, much like a bolt in rock climbing. But there is another framework which applies here, and it makes for the other half of the equation in why I argue the diegetic operator save is the category of save mechanic with the greatest potential effect on the player. This process is called suture, and it is, as defined by Kaja Silverman, the name given to the procedures by which cinematic texts confer subjectivity upon their viewers. Silverman's work originally applied to cinema and literature, but the broad strokes are also fitting for video games. Just as Silverman combines a psychoanalytic and semiotic framework to understand the processes of identification in the cinema, we may do the same to consider what a game is doing when it asks us not only to watch on-screen action, but to inhabit the body and the physical space of an on-screen avatar. There's always a semiotic relationship at work between player and game, as is true of all forms of narrative art. Stories asking us to identify our own subjectivity with that of the story's subject is a key part of the illusion of narrative. Silverman outlines three subjects here. The spoken subject is us, the viewer, the reader, the player. The subject of speech is the fictional character with whom we're aligned. And the speaking subject is the apparatus through which this character communes, be it the pages of a book, the moving images of a film, or the programming and interface of a video game, all of which offer the subject enunciation. So in video games, when the spoken subject, the player, identifies with the subject of speech, the avatar, the signifier I now confers the subjectivity of the avatar to the player. This, in short, is the process of suture. It refers to the moment when those subjectivities intersect, and the viewer/reader/player allows a temporary melding of their subjective identity with the figure on screen or in text. The operation of suture, writes Silverman, is successful at the moment that the viewing subject says, yes, that's me, or that's what I see. So what is that moment in a video game? Let's take Super Mario Bros. World 1-1 as an example. There are no button prompts, no on-screen text beyond the score, the timer, and the coin counter. We press right on the D-pad, and Mario moves right. We press left, and Mario moves left. We hold B, and Mario runs. We press A, and Mario jumps. We go forward a few steps and see a glowing block with a question mark. We hit it, and Mario collects a coin. We go a little farther, hit the next block, and Mario finds a mushroom. It collides with him, and he grows to twice his normal size. We jump on top of a Goomba, and it disappears. We knock into the Goomba, and Mario becomes small again. We fall into a pit, and the screen goes to black. As these actions accrue, happening to Mario, but as a result of our hands manipulating the controller, our identities merge, and the player and Mario suture. Thus, when Mario falls in the pit and the level begins anew with one fewer life on the counter, the player does not say, "Oh no, Mario died." They instead exclaim, "Oh no, I died." And this is the moment, to paraphrase Silverman, when we have sutured and come to agree, yes, that's me. Crucially, video games are filled with many, multivalent points of suture. Small actions like running, jumping, firing a weapon, controlling a vehicle, or answering a dialogue prompt, all of which confer a link between player and avatar, between the spoken subject and the subject of speech. These links have a snowball effect, such that while no single action is enough to successfully suture us into a game, the unique combination of commands and mechanics that forge a title's core gameplay loop come to create an overall sense of subjective alignment between player and game. And one of those actions is indeed saving, which is not always used as a suturing effect, but absolutely can be. To return to the Dragon Quest example, visiting the church and confessing to the priest to save is a clear point of suture, a moment where the signifier, pressing the buttons to input the commands to speak to the priest, and the signified, the hero telling the priest about his adventures so the priest may record them in a log, come together to create the sign that is the game save. Diegetic operator saves are unique among the three categories of game save mechanics for how they are predicated upon suture. Non-diegetic saves do not attempt to use saving as a point of identification. It's an abstract function, divorced from the world of the game or the subjects therein, that does not ask the player to align their subjectivity with any on-screen element. Diegetic operator saves are different. They turn the act of saving into a gameplay mechanic with a diegetic resonance, such that saving the game becomes a suture point, just like jumping, running, or any other basic command that helps build a game's overall suturing effect. Take, for instance, the journal in Persona 5, which is given to the protagonist, the player's avatar, near the outset of the story by Sojiro, the protagonist's new legal guardian. The protagonist has been sent to Tokyo for disciplinary reasons, and Sojiro tells you/them to write down all their/your daily activities inside of the journal as a rehabilitation routine. Functionally, the journal is the medium through which the player saves, but it is firmly aligned with this subjective, diegetic justification that tells the player a great deal about the protagonist's newfound circumstances and how he is seen by the people around him. We could also look to Stardew Valley, where saving by going to bed at the end of each day helps confer a sense of rhythm, in keeping with the diegetic setting of a small-town farm, where routine and repetition is meant to impart a sense of comfort and familiarity. Saving on its own cannot suture us entirely, but then no single game mechanic can. We know in the back of our minds that the priest in Dragon Quest isn't actually writing a detailed novelistic record of all the hero's adventures, just as we know hitting A in Super Mario Bros. Doesn't compel an actual flesh-and-blood Italian plumber to jump in the air and bang his head on a big metal block. But if you take the jumping and the saving and the running and all the other possible mechanics that combine to make a gameplay loop, they can, in their collective totality, suture the player into the world of the game. The relative strength of the diegetic operator save rests on its ability to both suture and tether the player through the mechanic of saving. These two phenomena can work together, and in fact they must, because while a game can have a save mechanic that tethers but does not suture, a game cannot have a save mechanic that sutures but does not tether. This is because the in-game save mechanic that confers subjectivity is also the one that provides an anchor point for the tethering effect of saving. The church, the journal, and the bed all confer subjectivity by making our process of saving internal to our on-screen avatars and the world they inhabit. But these places, objects, and characters also serve as totems of safety, places of privilege to which we tether ourselves while playing. The first 4 Resident Evil games are my favorite examples here. Each utilize an antique typewriter as the method of saving, usually placed within a safe room where enemies cannot typically intrude. They also require players to keep and find ink ribbons in the world, each of which allows for one save. Finding one of these safe rooms and rushing over to the typewriter to make permanent all the accomplishments made while traversing a labyrinthine haunted mansion or a creepy dilapidated police station is a little reward in and of itself, a reforging of the tether akin to what I previously demonstrated in Metroidvania games. But these moments also suture even more strongly than in most Metroidvania examples because of the Resident Evil franchise's intense horror mise-en-scène, which makes retreating to a safe room where we as our character can calmly analyze our inventory, get prepared, make a record, and then go back outside well-stocked, feel like a moment where subjectivity is conferred. The exhale of relief we let out must, we think, be shared by STARS agent Jill Valentine or rookie police officer Leon S. Kennedy. And the games themselves are clearly aware of this potential on a fundamental design level by making resources, like the ink ribbons, scarce and keeping the tension high, lending every interaction with a typewriter both a suturing effect and a reassuring tether. In this way, the games demonstrate how, through a design that interweaves sutures and tethers, game save mechanics can be so much more than a mere technical necessity. Not all games are going to allow for this effect by virtue of their genre, design, platform, and so forth. But there are many cases where the space absolutely exists to integrate save mechanics into the diegesis, providing players both the tether they crave via the personalized control of an operator save, and serving as an additional point of suture in a medium that requires multiple sites of subjectivity conference to create stable identification. A diegetic operator save is a powerful tool developers have at their disposal to help forge unique gameplay identities, make the gameplay experience more enjoyable, and through the combined forces of suture and tether, bring players one step closer to that ever-elusive, omnipresent buzzword, immersion.